Have you ever wondered if one small act of kindness could actually change eternity? Not something grand or public, not a miracle witnessed by thousands, just one hidden moment, one gesture nobody saw, one word nobody heard, and whether that single invisible act could be more powerful than all the great works combined. In the year 1515, in a walled city called Ávila in central Spain, a girl named Teresa de Cepeda y Ahumada was born into a family of 12 children. Her father, Don Alfonso Sanchez de Cepeda, was a wealthy merchant, honest, devout, a man who refused to own slaves because his compassion for others wouldn't allow it. Her mother, Dona Beatriz, died when Teresa was just 14. That loss marked her deeply, but the thing about Teresa wasn't her piety at first. It was her charm. Everyone loved her. She was beautiful, witty, sharp in conversation. She loved romance novels. She loved parties. At age 7, she and her brother Rodrigo ran away from home, fortified with nothing but raisins and stories of martyrs, determined to die for Christ in the land of the Moors. An uncle found them before they made it out of town. The adventure was over, but that iron will, that determination, never left. At 15, her father sent her to an Augustinian convent school because her romantic antics were getting too bold. She didn't mind. Convent life felt safer than the uncertainty of marriage and endless childbearing that killed so many women young. But when her father refused to let her become a nun, Teresa did what she'd always done. She decided for herself. On a November night in 1535, at age 20, she ran away from home and entered the Carmelite convent of the Incarnation in Avila. Her father eventually gave in. He even became a benefactor of the monastery. A year later, Teresa took her vows as Sister Teresa of Jesus. If you value documented stories of real saints and real history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources like Teresa's own autobiography, The Life of Teresa of Jesus, published in 1565, under directed orders from her confessors, and The Way of Perfection, written in 1566 for her nuns at St. Joseph's Convent, both preserved in the first complete edition edited by Fray Luis de Leon in 1588, held in rare collections like Georgetown University Library. These aren't generic summaries. These are primary documents written by Teresa's own hand. Now back to the information. But the convent wasn't what she expected. The Carmelite Convent of the Incarnation in Avila housed 140 nuns. It was a social club. Women with nowhere else to go ended up there, whether they had vocations or not. Nuns wore jewelry. They arranged their veils attractively. They left the convent for weeks to visit family and cut down on expenses. The parlor was packed with visitors, parties, young men. Prestige depended on money, not piety. And Teresa, with her charm and wit, became the life of the convent. She taught mental prayer to wealthy visitors because their gifts helped the economy, but she slipped. Flattery, vanity, gossip. Not great sins, maybe, but enough to keep her from God. Then she got sick. In 1537, Teresa contracted malaria. She had a seizure so severe that people thought she was dead. They dug her grave. 4 days later, she woke up. But her body was wrecked. Paralyzed for 3 years, never fully healthy again, and instead of driving her to prayer, the sickness became an excuse. She couldn't be alone enough. She wasn't healthy enough. She stopped praying almost entirely. For 18 years, Teresa barely prayed at all. She called it living under the guise of humility. She thought she was too sinful to deserve God's attention, too wicked for his gifts. But she was wrong. When she was 41, in 1556, a priest convinced her to return to prayer. It was brutal. She dreaded the hour of prayer more than any penance. She said she would rather endure anything than go to her oratory. But she kept going. And then God moved. Visions, locutions, words spoken directly into her mind, strength in trials, consolation in trouble. At one point, she experienced what's called transverberation. Her heart was pierced by a lance radiating divine love. After her death, doctors found laceration marks on her heart as if it had been burned. The whole city of Avila talked about the visions of this nun. Some said it was demonic, others said it was God. Teresa herself was terrified. She consulted the most spiritual confessors she could find. She even went to saintly laymen for advice. Most of them, never suspecting that her exaggerated confessions made her sins sound worse than they were, told her it was the work of evil spirits. The more she tried to resist, the more powerfully God worked in her soul. But here's where the story turns. In 1562, at age 47, Teresa founded a new convent, St. Joseph's, 13 nuns, strict poverty, no endowments. They wore habits of coarse serge and sandals instead of shoes, discalced, shoeless. They begged for food, they worked with their hands, they prayed in silence, almost complete enclosure. The whole city of Avila erupted in outrage. Her fellow nuns at the Incarnation turned against her. The local nobility complained. Town officers filed lawsuits. They feared a poor convent would drain civic resources. But Teresa, with that same iron will she'd shown at age 7, pushed through. On August 24th, 1562, St. Joseph's was officially established. Teresa became prioress, and for 5 peaceful years, she trained those 13 women in every kind of useful work and religious observance. Whether at spinning or at prayer, she was always first and most diligent. Now here's the thing about Teresa that nobody expected. She wasn't a grim reformer. She wasn't cold. She wasn't severe. She insisted that her nuns attend recreation. They sang. They played music. They danced with castanets on feast days. When one nun tried to be humble by never expressing a clever thought during recreation, Teresa shut it down immediately. She said, "It is bad enough to be stupid by grace." She wanted joy. She wanted laughter. She wanted her nuns to love each other, not just endure each other, and she lived it. Teresa had a saying that became famous among the sisters: "God deliver us from sullen saints." But underneath the laughter and the castanets, Teresa was teaching something profound, something most people missed. She wrote about it in The Way of Perfection, the book she composed between 1566 and 1568, specifically for her nuns. She wrote it quickly, never revising, never even rereading what she'd written. She complained about her own digressions. She said she didn't know the proper theological terms, but what she wrote was fire. And buried in those pages was a principle that would change everything. Teresa taught that the most powerful acts of love are the ones nobody sees. Not the grand gestures, not the public sacrifices, the hidden ones, the daily ones, the ones that cost you something small but real. A word of encouragement when you're tired, a smile when you're frustrated, sitting with a sister who's lonely when you'd rather be alone, making someone else's work easier when nobody's watching. She called these little acts of love, and she said they matter more than all the mystical visions and raptures combined. In chapter 4 of The Way of Perfection, Teresa wrote about detachment. She told her nuns that they should have nothing, own nothing, cling to nothing. But then she turned it. She said the real test of detachment isn't giving up possessions. It's giving up your will in the small moments. It's when a sister irritates you and you choose kindness anyway. It's when you're assigned a task you hate and you do it with joy. It's when someone criticizes you unfairly and you stay silent instead of defending yourself. She said these small hidden deaths to self are the real poverty, the real surrender, the real love. If you value documented spiritual history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. Now back to the information. She had 17 convents to manage by the end of her life. 17. She traveled constantly through Spain, on terrible roads, in brutal heat and ice, sleeping in rat-infested inns, dealing with opposition from bishops and theologians who thought a woman had no business reforming anything. She was old, she was sick, her body was breaking, but she never stopped. And in every convent, she taught the same thing: love in the little things, charity in the hidden moments, Christ in the daily grind. There's a story preserved in the accounts of the sisters who lived with her. It happened at St. Joseph's in Ávila. A young nun, newly professed, was struggling. She felt useless. She wasn't mystical like Teresa. She didn't have visions. She didn't pray well. She was just ordinary. Clumsy in the kitchen, slow at spinning, always messing something up, and she was ashamed. One day, she was in the refectory trying to serve the meal and she dropped a bowl. It shattered on the stone floor. Soup everywhere. The other nuns looked up. The girl froze, her face red, tears starting. Teresa was sitting at the table. She stood up, walked over, knelt down in the mess, started picking up the broken pieces, and then she did something nobody expected. She smiled at the girl and said, "Look, now we both have work to do." She handed the girl a rag. They cleaned it up together. The other nuns went back to their meal. It was over in a minute. Nobody thought much about it. But that girl, decades later, when she was an old woman herself, told the story with tears. She said that single moment, that small act of Teresa kneeling in the soup, changed her entire religious life, because she realized something. Holiness isn't about being perfect. It's about being kind when it costs you something. It's about making someone else's burden lighter. It's about seeing someone in their shame and choosing not to look away. That girl became one of the most faithful sisters in the order. She never forgot. And Teresa probably didn't even remember it, because for Teresa, that's just what you did. You loved people in the small moments. You served them in the hidden places. You carried them when nobody was watching. In 1567, the prior general of the Carmelites, Giovanni Battista Rubeo of Ravenna, visited Ávila. He was impressed by Teresa's prudent rule. He gave her full authority to found other convents, and Teresa took it. In August 1567, she founded a second convent at Medina del Campo. The journey there was brutal. The roads were terrible. They arrived at midnight. The building they'd been promised was half destroyed. No doors, broken windows, dirt everywhere. And Teresa, at age 52, got down on her hands and knees with the other nuns and started cleaning. By dawn, they'd made it habitable. They hung a bell. They said Mass. The convent was founded. That's how it went. Every foundation, every city. Hardship after hardship. But Teresa never complained. She never quit. In April 1567, she'd founded a convent at Malagon. Then Valladolid on August 15th. The nuns there fell ill almost immediately. They had to move to a new house provided by Dona Maria de Mendoza. Teresa stayed with them, nursing them back to health. She slept on the floor. She gave them her own food. She sat with them through the night when they were feverish. Small acts, hidden acts. Nobody recorded most of them. But the nuns remembered. They always remembered. In May 1569, she founded a convent at Toledo. This one was especially hard. The building was in terrible condition. The floors were rotted. The walls were crumbling. But Teresa took it. She had to. There was nowhere else. The first night, she and one other nun stayed alone in that building. It was dark, cold. They heard noises, footsteps, voices. The other nun was terrified. She thought the place was haunted. And Teresa? She stayed calm. She said, "If there are souls here who need prayer, we'll pray for them. If there are demons, let them come. We're doing God's work." That's how she was. Fearless when it mattered, gentle when it mattered more. By November 1568, Teresa had also established the first Reformed monastery for men at Duruelo with the help of a young friar named John Yepes. The place was tiny, just a small house in a remote village. When Teresa first saw it, she thought it was too small, too poor, too isolated. But John of the Cross, as he would come to be known, took one look and said, "It's perfect." He was in his late 20s. Teresa was 53. But they understood each other immediately. Both were mystics. Both were reformers. Both understood that holiness was found in the hidden places, not the grand ones. John of the Cross moved into that tiny monastery with one other friar, Anthony of Jesus. They slept on straw. They ate whatever the local farmers gave them. They prayed for hours in the cold. And they were happy, profoundly happy, because they were doing what God wanted. Teresa visited them once and later wrote about it. She said she found them in the choir, covered in snow that had blown in through the cracks in the walls, so deep in prayer they didn't even notice they were freezing. That's the kind of men they were. That's the kind of reform she built. Not comfortable, not easy, but real, authentic, grounded in love and sacrifice. John became Teresa's confessor and spiritual director. They wrote letters back and forth for years. Most of those letters are lost, but the ones that survive show a relationship of profound mutual respect. Teresa called him "my little Seneca," a reference to the ancient philosopher, because John was short in stature but towering in wisdom. And John called Teresa "mother," not just because she was older, but because she'd given birth to the reform, she'd made it possible. Without her courage, without her persistence, without her hidden daily acts of building and sacrificing and serving, none of it would have existed. But the cost was enormous. In 1577, John of the Cross refused to obey an order from his provincial to return to Medina. He was arrested, imprisoned in Toledo for 9 months, locked in a tiny cell barely big enough to lie down in. No light, no heat, barely any food. He was beaten. Interrogated, accused of disobeying the church. And through all of it, Teresa fought for him. She wrote letters to bishops, to the king, to anyone who might listen. She used every connection she had. She begged, she pleaded, she refused to give up on him. And finally, in August 1578, John escaped. He climbed out a window using strips of cloth tied together. He made his way to a convent of Teresa's nuns in Toledo. They hid him. They nursed him back to health. And Teresa, when she heard the news, wept with relief. That's another thing about Teresa. She loved her spiritual children fiercely. She fought for them. She protected them. When they were in danger, she moved heaven and earth to help them. When they were discouraged, she wrote them letters full of encouragement and practical advice. When they made mistakes, she corrected them with kindness. She treated each one as an individual. She knew their strengths, she knew their weaknesses, and she helped them grow, one nun at a time, one hidden act of mentorship at a time, one letter at a time, one conversation at a time. Between 1562 and 1582, Teresa founded 17 convents for women and helped establish several monasteries for men. Each foundation was a battle. Each one required permissions from bishops, approvals from town councils, funding from benefactors, and the sheer physical work of making uninhabitable buildings livable. Teresa did it all. At 50, at 60, at 65. sick, exhausted, in pain. She traveled thousands of miles through Spain on terrible roads in all kinds of weather. She dealt with opposition from every side. The unreformed Carmelites hated her for making them look bad. The townspeople feared her convents would drain their resources. The bishops were suspicious of a woman claiming divine visions. But Teresa kept going, foundation after foundation, year after year, because she knew it was God's work. And when you're doing God's work, you don't stop just because it's hard. But it wasn't easy. In 1571, Teresa was sent back to the convent of the Incarnation in Ávila, the place she'd left nearly 10 years earlier, to serve as prioress and restore order. The nuns were furious. They flew into an uproar when she arrived. They were insulted by her reform. They saw her as a traitor. And Teresa, instead of fighting, did something that stunned them. She asked for their help, humbly, genuinely. She said she needed them. And the next day, the nuns found a statue of Mary in the prioress's chair. Teresa had placed it there. She said Mary was the real prioress. She was just the assistant. That one gesture of humility broke the resistance. The nuns softened. And over the next 3 years, Teresa restored discipline, not by force, but by love, by small daily acts of respect, by listening, by serving, by choosing kindness over pride. In 1573, she began writing the Book of Foundations, documenting the establishment of the new convents. She wrote it between 1573 and 1582, recording not just the dates and places, but the lessons learned, the obstacles overcome, the moments of grace. In one passage, she described arriving at a new foundation with only 5 ducats, about $10. Someone asked her how she could possibly establish a convent with so little money. Teresa responded, "Teresa and this money are nothing, but God, Teresa, and these ducats suffice." That was her faith. Absolute, unshakable, practical. She knew God would provide. He always had. He always would. And in 1577, despite being 62 years old and in failing health, Teresa wrote The Interior Castle, her great mystical work. She wrote it in just a few months between June and November, working in whatever stolen moments she could find between traveling and administering her convents. The book compared the soul to a crystal castle with 7 mansions, each representing a deeper level of intimacy with God. The first 3 mansions were about purification. The 4th mansion was where mystical prayer began. The 5th mansion was the prayer of union. The 6th mansion was spiritual betrothal. In the 7th mansion, the innermost room was spiritual marriage, complete union with God. Total transformation, the soul living in permanent awareness of God's presence. But even in that book, which is all about mystical union and supernatural prayer, Teresa kept coming back to the same point. The way to God is through love, and love is proven in actions, not feelings, small actions, daily actions, hidden actions. In the 7th mansion, she wrote something that shocked her spiritual directors. She said that the soul in perfect union with God becomes more active, not less, more engaged with the world, not more detached. Because union with God fills you with His love for people, and love requires action, service, sacrifice. She wrote, Martha and Mary must work together. Contemplation and action, prayer and service, the mystical and the practical. You can't separate them. They're the same thing, love made visible. She wrote, the important thing is not to think much, but to love much, and so do that which best stirs you to love. There's another story. It happened in 1579. Teresa was traveling to Valladolid. She was 64, exhausted, sick. The roads were terrible. The wagon broke down. They had to walk. It was raining, cold, muddy. At one point, Teresa slipped and fell hard, bruised, soaked, humiliated. And according to the account written by one of the sisters who was with her, Teresa looked up at the sky and said to God, if this is how you treat your friends, it's no wonder you have so few. The sister recorded that Teresa then laughed, actually laughed, got up, kept walking. Because for Teresa, suffering wasn't something to escape. It was something to embrace. And even in the middle of it, you could find joy. You could find humor. You could find God. By 1580, the Reformed Carmelites were officially recognized as a separate province by Pope Gregory XIII on June 22nd. Teresa had won, but she was dying. Her body was failing. She'd been sick for years, but now it was worse. Heart problems, exhaustion, pain. In September 1582, she left Ávila for the last time. She traveled to Alba de Tormes to visit the Duchess of Alba, who'd asked her to come. Teresa knew she was dying, but the Duchess had asked, so she went. On October 4th, 1582, at age 67, Teresa died at Alba de Tormes. Her last words, according to those present, were, Lord, I am a daughter of the Church. She died peacefully, surrounded by her sisters, and the room, they said, filled with the scent of flowers. But here's what you need to understand. After Teresa died, the sisters who'd lived with her started talking, and the stories that came out weren't about the visions. They weren't about the raptures. They weren't about the mystical transverberation of her heart. They were about the small things, the hidden things, the daily acts of kindness that nobody thought mattered. One sister remembered that Teresa always served the oldest and sickest nuns first at meals. Another remembered that when a nun was sick, Teresa would sit with her at night, even when she was exhausted herself. Another remembered that Teresa never corrected a sister publicly. She always did it privately, gently, with love. Another remembered that when the convent ran out of food, Teresa would joke about it. She'd say, "Well, now we know we're really poor. Let's pray for our daily bread." And she'd turn it into a celebration of trust in God. The sisters also remembered her patience with failure. There was a nun who couldn't pray well. She felt stupid, distracted, hopeless. And Teresa told her, "Prayer is not about great thoughts. It's about love. Just stay there. Just keep showing up. That's enough." There was a nun who struggled with pride, who wanted to be noticed, who wanted to be important. And Teresa gave her the most menial tasks: cleaning, washing, serving, not to punish her, but to teach her. And when the nun complained, Teresa said, "Humility isn't feeling small, it's forgetting yourself completely." There was a nun who was angry, bitter, hard, and Teresa just loved her, day after day. Small kindnesses, a smile, a word of encouragement, a touch on the shoulder, until the hardness cracked, until the anger melted, until the nun wept and said, "How can you love me?" And Teresa said, "Because Christ loves you, and I'm just his hands." In 1588, 6 years after Teresa's death, the first complete edition of her works was published in Salamanca by Fray Luis de Leon. It included the life, the way of perfection, the interior castle, and advice for her nuns. These books spread through Europe. They were translated into multiple languages. They became some of the most widely read spiritual works in history, second only to Don Quixote in Spain. And what did people find when they read them? Not complex theology, not abstract mysticism, practical wisdom about love, about kindness, about humility, about serving God in the small, hidden moments of daily life. Teresa was beatified on April 24, 1614, by Pope Paul V. She was canonized on March 12, 1622, by Pope Gregory XV, and in 1970, Pope Paul VI declared her a Doctor of the Church. She was the first woman ever given that honor. Out of 36 Doctors of the Church across 2,000 years of history, Teresa of Ávila stands as one of the greatest teachers of prayer and love the Church has ever known. But here's the thing that matters most, the thing that brings us back to where we started. In all of Teresa's writings, in all her teachings, in all the accounts of the sisters who knew her, there's one principle that keeps showing up, one truth she lived and breathed. The most powerful acts of love are the ones nobody sees, the hidden kindnesses, the daily choices to serve. The moments when you could be selfish, but you choose love instead. Those are the acts that change eternity, not because they're grand, but because they're real, because they cost you something, because they prove your love. There's a prayer attributed to Teresa, though scholars debate whether she actually wrote it, but it captures everything she taught. Christ has no body now but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks compassion on this world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses all the world. That's the point. You're it. Your small acts, your hidden kindnesses, your daily choices. That's how Christ moves in the world. Not through miracles, through you. Through the bowl you pick up when someone drops it. Through the night you sit with someone sick. Through the correction you give gently instead of harshly. Through the patience you show when someone fails. Through the love you give when it costs you something. Teresa understood something most people miss. She understood that holiness isn't about doing great things. It's about doing small things with great love. She understood that one hidden act of daily kindness, done with a pure heart, carries more weight in eternity than all the public. Works combined, because public works can be done for glory, for recognition, for pride, but hidden works? Those are pure, those are real, those are love. In 1582, when Teresa died, the Spanish Inquisition had been active for over a century. The Counter-Reformation was in full force. Europe was tearing itself apart over theology, wars, persecution, martyrdom. And in the middle of all that chaos, Teresa taught her nuns to focus on something else. Not the big theological battles, not the political maneuvering, not the dramatic displays of faith, just love, just kindness, just service, one small act at a time, one hidden moment at a time, one choice at a time. That's how you change the world. That's how you change eternity. there's one more story that needs to be told. It happened at the convent of St. Joseph in Ávila. Teresa was old by then, probably in her 60s, sick, tired. She'd been traveling for years, founding convents, writing books, fighting opposition. And she came back to Ávila for a rest. One afternoon, she was sitting in the garden with some of the nuns. They were talking, laughing, enjoying the sun. And a young postulant, just a girl really, came out to join them. She was new, nervous, trying too hard to fit in. She sat down near Teresa, and at one point, Teresa reached over and took the girl's hand, just held it for a moment. Didn't say anything, just held it. And then she let go. The conversation continued. Nobody thought anything about it. It was a nothing moment, a small gesture, invisible, but that girl remembered it for the rest of her life. She became Sister Maria of the Incarnation. She lived to be 93. And when she was an old woman, dying in 1658, 76 years after Teresa's death, she told that story. She said that single moment when Teresa took her hand changed everything for her, because she felt seen, she felt loved, she felt like she belonged, and from that moment she knew she could do this. She could be a nun, she could live this life, she could love God and serve her sisters, all because of one small hidden act. One moment of kindness, one touch of a hand, that's the power Teresa saw. That's the truth she taught, that's the life she lived. One hidden act of daily kindness, multiplied across a lifetime, multiplied across the lives of everyone you touch, multiplied across generations. That's how eternity is shaped. Not in the grand gestures, in the small ones, not in the public moments, in the hidden ones, not in the things people applaud, in the things only God sees. Teresa of Ávila died on October 4th, 1582. She was buried at Alba de Tormes, and almost immediately, people started reporting miracles, healings, answers to prayer, visions of Teresa appearing to help souls in purgatory. The church investigated. The evidence was overwhelming. Teresa was a saint, but the real miracle wasn't the visions, it wasn't the levitations, it wasn't even the transverberation of her heart. The real miracle was how she loved, how she served, how she chose kindness in 1,000 small, hidden ways that nobody thought mattered. Until they did. Until those small acts added up to a life that changed the world. In 1970, when Pope Paul VI declared Teresa a doctor of the Church, he said something remarkable. He said Teresa's great contribution wasn't her mystical theology. It was her teaching on love, on humility, on the hidden life. He said she showed the Church that holiness is accessible to everyone, not just the great mystics, not just the martyrs, everyone. Because everyone can choose kindness, everyone can serve in small ways, everyone can love in the hidden moments. That's the path to God. That's the way to holiness. That's how you change eternity. And here's the final truth, the thing that brings it all home. In 1646, 64 years after Teresa's death, her body was exhumed. They wanted to move her remains to a more fitting location, and when they opened the coffin, something impossible happened. Her body was incorrupt, perfectly preserved. No decay, no smell, just the scent of flowers, the same scent the sisters had reported when she died. Her heart, the one that had been pierced by divine love, was removed and placed in a reliquary. And when they examined it, they found the laceration marks, proof of the transverberation, proof of the miracle. But more than that, they found something else, a heart that had loved completely, a heart that had given everything, a heart that had proven in 1,000 small hidden ways that love is the only thing that matters. Today, Teresa's body rests in Alba de Tormes. Her heart is kept in a separate reliquary. Pilgrims come from around the world to see them, to pray, to ask for her intercession. But the real legacy of Teresa isn't in the relics. It's in the lives she touched. It's in the sisters she taught. It's in the convents she founded. It's in the books she wrote. It's in the principles she lived. One hidden act of daily kindness. That's the power she saw. That's the truth she proved. That's the legacy she left. So if you're wondering whether one small act of kindness could change eternity, now you know it can. It does. It always has. Not because the act is great, but because love is great. Not because people see it, but because God sees it. Not because it changes the world all at once, but because it changes one person, and that person changes another, and another. Until the whole world is different, until eternity is shaped. By you, by your choice, by your hidden act of daily kindness. Teresa of Ávila proved it. She lived it. And she left us the map. Love in the small things, serve in the hidden places, choose kindness when it costs you something. That's the way. That's the truth. That's the life. And it starts today, with you, with one small act. One hidden kindness. One choice to love when nobody's watching. Because somebody is watching. God is watching. And he sees. And he remembers. And he counts every single act of love as gold in eternity.